I never thought a piece of rope and some wooden pins would turn into a battle that would consume 6 months of my life. But when Sharon Hartley came knocking on my door that Tuesday afternoon in August, I could already sense the storm brewing behind her tight-lipped smile. "Mr. Henderson," she said, adjusting the clipboard she carried like a shield, "I'm here to discuss a violation of the Pine Valley Estates community standards." I leaned against the doorframe of my Colorado Springs home, wiping my hands on a dish rag. What violation would that be? Her eyes darted past me to the backyard, where I'd strung up a simple clothesline between 2 posts the previous weekend. White sheets billowed gently in the mountain breeze, along with a few towels and work shirts. "That unsightly apparatus you've installed, it's in direct violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws regarding outdoor fixtures and aesthetic maintenance." "It's a clothesline, Sharon. People have been drying clothes outside since the dawn of civilization. And this is Pine Valley Estates, not a trailer park." She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "The bylaw is quite clear. All outdoor installations must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee, and I can assure you that clotheslines are explicitly prohibited under our aesthetic standards." I'd moved into Pine Valley Estates 6 months earlier, drawn by the reasonable housing prices and proximity to my job at the aerospace plant. The HOA fees seemed steep at $300 monthly, but the neighborhood looked well maintained, and I figured it was worth the investment. Now, standing here arguing about laundry, I was beginning to question that decision. "I wasn't aware," I said, keeping my tone measured. "Nobody mentioned clotheslines specifically when I reviewed the documents." Sharon produced a thick binder from under her clipboard, flipping it open to a marked page. "Page 47, subsection D. No outdoor drying racks, clotheslines, or similar fixtures shall be visible from any street or neighboring property. You signed acknowledgement of these bylaws when you purchased your home." That's nearly 200 pages of regulations. You can't expect everyone to memorize every line. "Ignorance isn't an excuse, Mr. Henderson. The clothesline needs to come down by Friday, or you'll be fined $50 per day until compliance is achieved." She smiled that tight smile again. "Have a pleasant afternoon." I watched her walk back to her white Lexus, her sensible heels clicking against the driveway. Sharon Hartley was the HOA president, a position she'd held for 7 years, according to my neighbor Tom. She was in her late 40s, with short blonde hair that never seemed to move, and a wardrobe consisting entirely of pastel pantsuits. Tom had warned me that Sharon ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom, but I'd figured he was exaggerating. Inside, I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws and found the section Sharon had referenced. Sure enough, the prohibition was there in black and white. What bothered me more was the date it had been added to the bylaws. According to the revision history in the front matter, Section 4.7D had been amended just 3 months ago, during the same meeting where the board had voted to increase monthly fees. The next day, I stopped by Tom's place after work. He was watering his lawn, careful to keep every blade of grass at the HOA mandated 2-inch height. "She got you too, huh?" Tom said when I told him about Sharon's visit. "She went door to door last month when the Andersons put up a bird feeder, claimed it was an unauthorized structure." "This is insane. It's a clothesline. I'm trying to save money on electricity." Tom shut off his hose. "You notice the electric rates around here?" "What about them?" "Sharon's husband, Gerald, he's on the board of directors for Mountain Peak Energy, the company that supplies power to this whole development. About a year ago, the HOA signed an exclusive contract with them. We can't choose our own provider. And ever since then, the rates have been climbing. I'm paying almost twice what I paid 2 years ago." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That can't be legal. It's buried in the HOA agreement. The board has authority to negotiate utility contracts on behalf of the community. They sold it as a way to get bulk discounts, but it's done the opposite. Tom glanced toward Sharon's house at the end of the cul-de-sac. "And now she's going after anything that might reduce electricity usage. Think about it. No clotheslines means everyone runs their dryers. More profit for Mountain Peak." That's corrupt. That's Sharon Hartley. I went home and pulled up my recent electric bills. Tom was right. My July bill had been $347 for a 2-bedroom house where I lived alone. I worked long hours, so I was barely home. There was no reason for the bill to be that high. Friday came, and I didn't take down the clothesline. I had no intention of backing down over something so ridiculous. Sure enough, Sharon's car appeared in my driveway that afternoon. She took photos of the clothesline from multiple angles, making notes on her clipboard. "Mr. Henderson," she called out when she saw me watching from the window. "This is your final warning." I opened the front door. "Actually, Sharon, I've been doing some research. Colorado has a right to dry law. House Bill 1199, passed in 2008. It prohibits HOAs from banning clotheslines." Her expression didn't change, but I saw her grip tighten on the clipboard. "Our bylaws supersede state recommendations." "They're not recommendations, they're laws. The Pine Valley Estates bylaws are a legally binding contract that you agreed to when you purchased your property. Our attorneys have assured us that our community standards are fully enforceable." She turned toward her car. "Your first fine will appear on your September statement. I suggest you reconsider your position." That evening, I called a lawyer. Janet Morrison ran a small practice specializing in property law and had good reviews online. I explained the situation, and she listened quietly before responding. "Colorado's right to dry law is absolutely enforceable," she said. "House Bill 1199 specifically states that HOAs cannot prohibit the use of clotheslines or other solar drying devices. The law recognizes both the environmental benefits and the right of homeowners to reduce energy costs." "So I'm in the clear?" "Legally, yes, but that doesn't mean the HOA won't fight it. These disputes can get ugly. Do you have documentation of the fine they're threatening?" I promised to send her copies of all correspondence from Sharon and the HOA board. Janet said she'd draft a letter citing the state law and demanding they rescind the violation notice. The following week, I received a formal notice of violation in the mail, along with a $50 fine added to my HOA account. I forwarded everything to Janet, who sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA board explaining that their clothesline ban violated state law and that they needed to immediately remove the violation and refund the fine. Sharon's response came 3 days later. The HOA board had voted unanimously to reject my appeal. They claimed that Pine Valley Estates' status as a planned community gave them the authority to maintain aesthetic standards that might differ from general state guidelines. They increased the daily fine to $75. "They're bluffing," Janet said when I called her, frustrated and angry. "They're hoping you'll back down before this gets expensive for them. We can file a lawsuit, but I need to be honest with you. Litigation is costly and time-consuming." "How much are we talking?" "Depends on how far they want to take it. Could be $5,000, could be $20,000, and it might take 6 months to a year to resolve." I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the numbers. I'd already racked up nearly $400 in fines. My electric bill was still astronomical because I'd been running the dryer to avoid escalating the conflict further. The principle of the thing gnawed at me. This wasn't just about a clothesline anymore. It was about Sharon Hartley and her cronies exploiting homeowners for profit. "File the lawsuit," I said. Janet filed a complaint in El Paso County District Court, seeking a declaratory judgment that Colorado's right to dry law superseded the HOA's bylaws. We also requested reimbursement of all fines and attorney's fees. The HOA, represented by a Denver firm that probably charged $300 an hour, filed a motion to dismiss. Meanwhile, my daily life in Pine Valley Estates became increasingly uncomfortable. Sharon found other violations to cite. My garage door had been left open past 8 p.m., which apparently violated quiet hours provisions. My trash can was visible from the street on a non-collection day. My lawn was a 1/4 inch too long in one section. Each violation came with a fine. Each fine went unpaid, as Janet assured me we'd resolve everything together once the court ruled. But the harassment was taking its toll. Then Tom knocked on my door one evening in October, looking worried. "They got Barbara," he said, referring to a widow who lived 2 streets over. She'd been using a small drying rack on her patio. Nothing visible from the street, completely discreet. Sharon cited her anyway. Barbara's on a fixed income. She can't afford to fight this. Did she take it down? She had to. Between the HOA fines and the electric bills, she was choosing between that and her medication. Tom's face was red with anger. "This is criminal, Ian. They're bleeding people dry." I invited Tom inside and showed him the research I'd been compiling. Mountain Peak Energy's rates were nearly 40% higher than the state average. Gerald Hartley sat on their board of directors, and Sharon had pushed through the exclusive contract shortly after his appointment. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. "We need to get more people involved," I said. "If it's just me fighting this, Sharon can isolate the problem. But if we organize the neighborhood, show that this affects everyone, we have leverage." Tom nodded slowly. "There's a general HOA meeting next month. All homeowners can attend. We could bring it up there." "Sharon will shut us down. Not if we come prepared. Not if we show everyone exactly what's happening with their money." We spent the next 3 weeks gathering information. Tom talked to neighbors, collecting copies of their electric bills and documenting HOA fines. We found that Sharon had cited 17 different homes for various violations in the past 6 months, all of them related to outdoor fixtures or modifications that could reduce electricity usage. One couple had been fined for installing LED floodlights instead of the standard incandescent bulbs the HOA specified. Another homeowner faced violations for putting up solar screens on his windows. The pattern was unmistakable. The November HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland building near the neighborhood entrance. About 40 homeowners showed up, which Tom said was unusually high attendance. Most meetings drew maybe a dozen people. Word had spread that something interesting might happen. Sharon called the meeting to order, running through the usual agenda items: budget reports, landscaping contracts, upcoming holiday decoration guidelines. Her voice droned on, professional and detached. When she opened the floor for homeowner comments, I stood up. "I'd like to discuss the electric rates we're paying under the Mountain Peak Energy contract," I said. Sharon's smile never wavered. "That's not on tonight's agenda, Mr. Henderson. If you'd like to request a review of utility contracts, you can submit a formal proposal to the board." "I'm not requesting a review. I'm asking why homeowners in this community are paying 40% more for electricity than the state average." Murmurs rippled through the room. Sharon's smile tightened. "Mountain Peak Energy provides competitive rates and reliable service. The board negotiated this contract in good faith for the benefit of all residents." Tom stood up. "Your husband sits on Mountain Peak's board of directors. Isn't that a conflict of interest?" "Gerald's professional affiliations have no bearing on HOA business, and I resent the implication of impropriety." Sharon's voice had gone cold. "This meeting will continue with the scheduled agenda, or I'll call it adjourned." "Then let's talk about the clothesline ban," I said, "and the fines being levied against homeowners who are trying to reduce those inflated electric bills." Barbara, the widow Tom had mentioned, stood up shakily. "I've paid over $600 in fines because I dried my clothes on my patio. I'm 72 years old and living on Social Security. This is wrong." More voices joined in. People were angry, and once they started talking, the floodgates opened. One man had been fined for installing a programmable thermostat. A woman faced violations for using energy-efficient appliances that hummed at a frequency Sharon claimed violated noise ordinances. The room erupted into heated discussion. Sharon banged her gavel, face flushed. "This meeting is adjourned. Anyone wishing to file formal complaints can do so in writing." "We're not leaving," Tom said quietly. "You work for us, Sharon. We pay your salary through HOA fees, and we deserve answers." The standoff lasted for several tense seconds before Sharon gathered her materials and walked out, followed by 2 other board members. The remaining homeowners stayed, and we spent the next hour comparing notes and experiences. By the end of the evening, 23 households had signed a petition demanding an audit of the HOA's finances and the Mountain Peak Energy contract. The lawsuit crawled forward. In December, the judge denied the HOA's motion to dismiss, which Janet said was a good sign. The case would proceed to trial unless we could reach a settlement. The HOA's attorneys proposed that I could keep my clothesline if I agreed to drop all claims for fine reimbursement and attorney's fees. "It's a terrible deal," Janet said. "They're admitting they can't win, but they want to avoid setting a precedent. If you accept this, everyone else in the neighborhood is still stuck." So we keep going. We keep going. January brought a new development. An investigative reporter from the Colorado Springs Gazette contacted me. Someone, possibly Tom or another homeowner, had tipped them off about the situation. The reporter, Marcus Webb, Wanted to do a story on HOA, overreach, and utility corruption. I met Marcus at a coffee shop near my work. He was in his mid-30s, wearing a rumpled sport coat and carrying a laptop bag covered in press credentials. "This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear," Marcus said after I explained everything. HOAs operating like mini dictatorships, conflicts of interest with utility companies, homeowners getting squeezed from both sides. It's systemic abuse. Can you prove the connection between Sharon's husband and Mountain Peak? I've already started. Gerald Hartley joined Mountain Peak's board in March 2022. The HOA contract was signed 2 months later. Your neighborhood's rates increased by 18% immediately, then another 12% over the following year. Meanwhile, Mountain Peak's rates for non-contracted customers only went up by 6% total. Marcus pulled up spreadsheets on his laptop. The math tells a clear story. "What about Sharon?" Marcus hesitated. "That's trickier. Unless we can show she directly benefited financially, it's hard to prove corruption. The HOA president position is technically volunteer. She doesn't draw a salary. But she pushed the contract through. She had to know it would hurt homeowners. Knowing and proving are different things. What we can prove is a pattern of suppressing any attempt by homeowners to reduce their electricity consumption. The clothesline ban, the fines, the other violations you've documented. Put it all together, and it paints a picture of someone protecting a financial interest." Marcus's article ran in late January. It was a front-page feature titled, "Drying Rights: How One HOA's Power Grab Left Homeowners Hanging." The article detailed my lawsuit, the inflated electric rates, Gerald's position at Mountain Peak, and Sharon's aggressive enforcement of bylaws that seemed designed to maximize electricity usage. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Local news stations picked up the story. I did 3 television interviews in 1 week. The Colorado Attorney General's office announced they were opening an investigation into Mountain Peak Energy's contracting practices, and the HOA received over 200 emails demanding Sharon's resignation. Sharon, to her credit, didn't back down quietly. She issued a statement through the HOA's attorneys claiming that the Gazette article was defamatory and that all board actions had been taken in good faith to maintain property values and community standards. She accused me of orchestrating a harassment campaign and suggested that my real motivation was to avoid paying legitimate fines for violations. But the damage was done. At the February HOA meeting, attendance topped 90 homeowners, nearly half the community. A motion was brought to hold a special election to recall the entire board. Sharon tried to argue that the bylaws required a 2/3 majority for recall elections, but a homeowner named Patricia Devereaux, who happened to be a paralegal, pointed out that Colorado state law only required a simple majority. The vote wasn't even close. 107 homeowners voted in favor of the recall. 23 voted against. Sharon Hartley was out. The special election held 3 weeks later brought in a new board, including Tom as president and Patricia as vice president. Their first action was to terminate the exclusive contract with Mountain Peak Energy, paying the early termination fee out of the HOA's reserve fund. Their second action was to formally rescind the clothesline ban and all related fines. My lawsuit became moot, but Janet and I pushed forward anyway, seeking a judgment that would establish clear precedent. We wanted it on record that Colorado's right to dry law superseded HOA bylaws, preventing future boards from trying the same tactics. In March, the judge ruled in our favor. The decision was unambiguous. HOAs in Colorado could not prohibit clotheslines or other solar drying devices, regardless of what their bylaws said. The ruling ordered Pine Valley Estates, HOA, to reimburse all fines related to the clothesline ban and to pay my attorney's fees, which had climbed to nearly $12,000. But the story wasn't over yet. The Attorney General's investigation into Mountain Peak Energy uncovered something bigger than any of us had anticipated. Gerald Hartley hadn't just influenced the Pine Valley Estates contract. He'd been working with HOA board members in 6 different Colorado communities, pushing through exclusive contracts that inflated rates while paying kickbacks to board members through consulting fees and other arrangements. In April, federal investigators joined the case. What had started as a local utility scam had crossed state lines. Mountain Peak Energy operated in Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Similar schemes were found in at least 15 communities across those states. I watched the news in my living room one evening in May as federal agents arrested Gerald Hartley outside Mountain Peak's Denver headquarters. The charges included wire fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Federal Power Act. Sharon Hartley wasn't charged federally, but the El Paso County District Attorney brought state charges against her for theft and abuse of office. The trial was set for August, but Sharon's attorneys negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to 2 counts of theft and 1 count of official misconduct. The prosecution agreed to recommend probation instead of jail time in exchange for her cooperation in the federal case against Gerald and other Mountain Peak executives. I attended the sentencing hearing in September, almost exactly a year after Sharon had first knocked on my door. She looked smaller somehow, standing before the judge in a gray suit that seemed too large for her frame. Her attorney made a brief statement about how Sharon had been misguided but not malicious, how she truly believed she was acting in the community's best interests. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Oakes, wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Hartley, you held a position of trust within your community," Judge Oakes said. "Homeowners relied on you to act in their interests, not to enrich yourself and your husband at their expense. The evidence shows a pattern of deliberate action to maximize utility costs, while punishing anyone who tried to reduce their consumption. You fined elderly residents, you harassed working families, and you did it all while hiding behind claims of maintaining property values." Sharon stood silently, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'm sentencing you to 3 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution to be determined based on the total fines collected under the clothesline ban and related policies. You are also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or similar community organization in the state of Colorado." Sharon nodded once, her face blank, and was led away by her attorney. Gerald's trial was more complex. I testified about the timeline of the clothesline ban and the pattern of HOA violations. Marcus Webb provided analysis of the rate increases and contract terms. The prosecution built a compelling case that Gerald had systematically exploited his position at Mountain Peak to create captive markets in HOA communities, guaranteeing inflated rates and suppressing any attempts at energy conservation. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on 17 counts. Gerald Hartley was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $3 million in restitution to affected homeowners across multiple states. Mountain Peak Energy itself faced massive fines and was forced to renegotiate all its HOA contracts at rates subject to State Utility Commission oversight. The company's stock price collapsed, and they were eventually acquired by a larger regional utility company. Back in Pine Valley Estates, life slowly returned to normal, though with significant changes. The new HOA board, led by Tom, instituted term limits and transparency requirements. All board meetings were now recorded and posted online. Financial statements were distributed quarterly, and homeowners had the right to challenge any bylaw through a simple majority vote. My electric bill dropped to $140 a month after we switched to a competitive provider. I kept my clothesline up, and 36 other homes in the neighborhood installed their own. On sunny days, the sight of laundry fluttering in the Colorado breeze became common, a visible reminder of the fight we'd won. Barbara, the widow who'd been fined for her patio drying rack, received over $1,500 in restitution. She sent me a thank you card with a picture of her grandchildren. Janet Morrison's firm received several new clients from other HOA disputes across the state. The precedent we'd established in Henderson versus Pine Valley Estates HOA became cited regularly in right-to-dry cases. She told me that the number of HOA clothesline bans had dropped dramatically statewide. Marcus Webb won a regional journalism award for his investigative reporting on the Mountain Peak scandal. He moved to a larger paper in Denver, but still called occasionally to check in and see how things were going. As for me, I learned more about HOA law, utility regulation, and community organizing than I ever wanted to know. But I also learned something valuable about standing up for principle, even when it seems easier to just comply. One Saturday morning in October, Almost exactly 2 years after this whole thing started, I was hanging laundry on my clothesline when a moving truck pulled up to Sharon's old house. She and Gerald had divorced, and she'd moved to an apartment across town. The house had sat empty for months before finally selling. A young couple got out of a sedan, followed by a toddler. They looked excited, pointing at different features of the house and yard. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking hands with the husband. "I'm Ian Henderson, live 3 doors down." "Thanks," he said. "I'm David. This is my wife, Michelle. We're excited to be here. Seems like a great community." "It is now," I said. "Let me know if you need anything, and feel free to put up a clothesline if you want. That's completely allowed." David laughed. "Actually, that's one of the reasons we chose this place. We read about your lawsuit in the news. It's good to know the HOA isn't going to harass us over every little thing." Michelle bounced the toddler on her hip. "We were renting in an apartment complex before. The idea of having our own yard, being able to make our own choices about our home, that's what we wanted." "Well, you picked the right place," I said. "Just make sure to stay involved. Attend the HOA meetings, vote on issues, keep the board accountable. That's how we make sure what happened before doesn't happen again." They promised they would, and I headed back to my own yard. The laundry was almost dry, and I needed to finish some yard work before the afternoon got too hot. Tom came by later that day with beers, and we sat on my back porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. "You know, I was thinking about everything that happened," Tom said. 2 years ago, if someone had told me that a clothesline would bring down an HOA board and send people to prison, I would have thought they were crazy." "It was never really about the clothesline," I said. "It was about people in positions of power abusing that power for personal gain. The clothesline was just where the system's corruption became visible. Still, kind of poetic. Something as simple and old-fashioned as drying clothes in the sun ended up exposing a multi-state fraud scheme." Sometimes the small things matter most. Sharon made the mistake of thinking she could squeeze everyone without consequences. She underestimated how much people care about their homes and their rights. Tom raised his beer. "To clotheslines and accountability." I clinked my bottle against his. "And to nosy neighbors who aren't afraid to ask questions." The next week, I received an invitation to speak at a state legislative committee hearing on HOA reform. Colorado was considering several bills to increase transparency and homeowner protections, and they wanted testimony from people who'd experienced HOA abuse firsthand. I took a personal day from work and drove to the state capitol in Denver. The hearing room was packed with homeowners, HOA board members, property management companies, and various advocacy groups. Everyone had an opinion on how HOAs should be regulated. When my turn came, I kept it simple. I told the story of the clothesline ban, the inflated electric rates, and the pattern of violations designed to maximize utility costs. I explained how Sharon Hartley had abused her position and how the existing laws hadn't been enough to stop her initially. "The right to dry law was already on the books," I said, "but it took a lawsuit, media attention, and ultimately a criminal investigation to enforce it. Homeowners shouldn't have to go to court just to hang up their laundry. We need stronger enforcement mechanisms and real penalties for HOA boards that ignore state law." Several committee members asked questions about the timeline, the fines, and how the new board had changed things. I answered as thoroughly as I could, emphasizing that most HOA board members were well-intentioned, but that the structure of HOAs made abuse too easy when bad actors took control. One legislator, a representative from Pueblo named Chen, asked what I thought was the most important reform. "Transparency," I said without hesitation. "Everything the board does should be documented and accessible to homeowners. Meetings, finances, contracts, enforcement actions, all of it. When boards operate in secret, they can get away with almost anything. Sunshine is the best disinfectant." The committee ultimately passed 3 bills that session. One required all HOA meetings to be open to homeowners with adequate notice. Another mandated quarterly financial disclosures and independent audits for communities over a certain size. The third established an ombudsman office within the state attorney general's department to investigate HOA complaints and enforce state laws that superseded HOA bylaws. Governor Polis signed all 3 bills in a ceremony that April. I was invited to attend, standing in the background while he made remarks about protecting homeowner rights and preventing abuse. It felt surreal, watching legislation being signed that had grown directly from my fight over a simple clothesline. Back in Pine Valley Estates, the community continued to evolve. The new board installed solar panels on the community center, cutting the common area electricity costs by 60%. They organized neighborhood cleanup days and summer barbecues that actually brought people together instead of just collecting fees and issuing fines. Property values, ironically, increased. Turns out that people were willing to pay more to live in a community with a functional, accountable HOA than one run like a dictatorship. Several real estate agents started using Pine Valley Estates as an example of how HOAs should operate. I continued to hang my laundry on sunny days, though I'd also invested in a high-efficiency dryer for when weather didn't cooperate. The clothesline had become something of a neighborhood symbol. When the local elementary school did a project on community history, 3 different kids interviewed me about the clothesline revolution, as they called it. One of those kids was Barbara's granddaughter, Emily. She was 8 years old and very serious about her school project. "Why did you fight the HOA?" she asked, recorder running on her phone. "Weren't you scared they would make you move?" "They couldn't make me move," I explained. "I owned my home. But yes, I was worried about the fines and the legal costs. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right even when it's scary." "My grandma says you're a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got tired of being pushed around. The real heroes were all the neighbors who stood together. Your grandma was one of them. She spoke up at that meeting even though she was scared too." Emily nodded seriously, making notes. "For my project, I'm making a poster about how communities can work together to fix problems. Can I take a picture of your clothesline?" "Of course." She took several photos from different angles, very professional about it. Her report, which Barbara showed me later, got an A+ and was displayed in the school hallway for Parents' Night. As months turned into more than 2 years, I found myself reflecting on what the whole experience had taught me. I'd moved to Pine Valley Estates looking for a simple, quiet place to live. Instead, I'd gotten drawn into a battle that exposed corruption, sent people to prison, and changed state law. But it had also connected me to my community in ways I never expected. Tom became one of my closest friends. I knew most of my neighbors by name now, not just the ones on my immediate street. I'd learned that democracy, even at the HOA level, required constant attention and participation. The fight had cost me time, money, and stress. But it had been worth it. Every time I saw laundry drying in someone's yard, every time I looked at my reasonable electric bill, every time I attended an HOA meeting where the board actually listened to homeowners, I was reminded that ordinary people could make a difference when they refused to accept injustice. Sharon Hartley completed her probation in community service. I saw her once, working at a food bank as part of her court-ordered hours. We made eye contact briefly. She looked away first. I didn't feel angry anymore, just a kind of sad resignation. She'd had power and had chosen to abuse it, and now she was facing the consequences. Gerald served his time at a minimum security federal facility. He'd be eligible for parole in a few more years. Mountain Peak Energy no longer existed as an independent company, absorbed into the larger utility that had bought them out. The executives who'd participated in the kickback schemes had all pled guilty or been convicted. On a warm spring afternoon, nearly 3 years after that first confrontation, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. Tom brought his famous potato salad. Barbara made her grandmother's recipe for baked beans. Patricia organized games for the kids. Nearly 50 people showed up, filling my yard with conversation and laughter. David and Michelle, the couple who'd moved into Sharon's old house, brought their toddler, who was now a very active 3-year-old. They'd become active in the community, with Michelle joining the Architectural Review Committee to help ensure it focused on reasonable standards rather than petty enforcement. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Tom and I found ourselves back on the porch, familiar bottles of beer in hand. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just taken down the clothesline that first day?" Tom asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Life would have been simpler. I'd have saved myself a lot of headaches. But Sharon would still be running things. The electric rates would still be inflated. People like Barbara would still be getting squeezed. I know, that's why I don't regret it, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments when I wondered if it was worth the fight. Tom gestured at the yard where the last few neighbors were gathering their kids and leftover food. Look at this, though. Look at what we built. This community is actually a community now, not just a collection of houses being milked for fees and fines. He was right. The barbecue, the involvement, the sense that people actually cared about each other and their neighborhood, that was worth fighting for. Besides, Tom added with a grin, you're kind of famous now. Henderson versus Pine Valley Estates is Colorado HOA law precedent. Your name is going to be in law books. Great. My legacy will be fighting for the right to hang up wet socks. Hey, there are worse legacies. You could be remembered for running a corrupt HOA and going to prison. We both laughed at that, though the humor was tinged with the memory of just how bad things had gotten. Later that night, after everyone had left and I'd cleaned up, I walked out to the clothesline. It was still there, still sturdy, the same simple setup that had started everything. In the moonlight, I could see similar lines in several neighboring yards. I thought about that first conversation with Sharon, her clipboard and tight smile, her absolute certainty that she had the authority to tell me what I could and couldn't do with my own property. I thought about the fear I'd felt when the fines started piling up, the stress of the lawsuit, the uncertainty of whether fighting back was the right choice. But I also thought about the judge's ruling, the new HOA board, the legislative reforms, and all the homeowners across Colorado who would benefit from the precedent we'd set. I thought about Barbara getting her restitution check and the relief in her voice when she called to thank me. I thought about the community we'd built from the ashes of Sharon's petty tyranny. The clothesline swayed gently in the night breeze, empty now but ready for tomorrow's laundry. It was just a piece of rope and some wooden posts, nothing special or remarkable, but it had become a symbol of something larger, the idea that ordinary people had rights, that power had to be accountable, and that sometimes the small acts of resistance mattered most. I went back inside, locked the door, and got ready for bed. Tomorrow was another workday, another routine day in Pine Valley Estates. The HOA would continue functioning, serving rather than ruling. Electric bills would remain reasonable, and clotheslines would flutter in backyards across the neighborhood, a quiet reminder that we'd stood together and won. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, genuine satisfaction with where I lived and the community around me. It had taken a fight to get here, a longer and harder fight than anyone should have to wage over something so simple. But we'd won, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who came after. The clothesline remained, a monument to the principle that home was meant to be exactly that, a place where you could live freely, make your own choices, and not fear arbitrary punishment from petty tyrants. It was a principle worth fighting for, worth defending, worth all the stress and cost and uncertainty, and in the end, justice had prevailed. The corrupt were punished, the law was clarified, and the community was stronger for having gone through the struggle together. It wasn't the story I'd expected when I'd moved to Pine Valley Estates, but it was the story that needed to happen. Sometimes the most important battles start with the smallest things. A clothesline, a piece of rope, the simple desire to dry your laundry in the sun without asking permission from anyone. From that small seed grew a movement that changed laws, protected rights, and proved that ordinary people still had power when they chose to exercise it. Sharon Hartley had thought she could control everything, that her position gave her unlimited authority. She'd been wrong. The homeowners of Pine Valley Estates had shown her, shown Gerald, shown Mountain Peak Energy, and shown every other would-be tyrant that there were limits to power and consequences for abuse. As spring turned to summer and the Colorado sun climbed higher in the sky, clotheslines across Pine Valley Estates held sheets and towels and work clothes, all drying naturally and freely in the warm breeze. It was a simple thing, ordinary and unremarkable, exactly as it should be. And that ordinariness, that simple freedom to make basic choices about our own homes and lives, was the victory we'd fought for and won. The story that started with Sharon Hartley's tight smile and clipboard had ended with her conviction, Gerald's imprisonment, and a community transformed. But more than that, It had ended with the restoration of something fundamental, the right of homeowners to live in their homes without fear, without exploitation, without petty tyranny disguised as community standards. 3 years, countless hours, thousands of dollars, and one simple clothesline later, we had our homes back. We had our community back. And we had proven that when ordinary people stand together against injustice, even the most entrenched power structures can fall. The clothesline still hangs in my backyard today, a testament to that truth. And every time I use it, every time I see neighbors using theirs, I remember that we didn't just win the right to dry our clothes. We won the right to determine our own futures, to hold our leaders accountable, and to build the kind of community where people matter more than profits. That was the real victory. Everything else was just laundry.